My name is Carmi Palafox, an urban planner and economist. Welcome to Beyond Places, the podcast about the planning, design, and leadership of the communities and cities that we call home.
Welcome to another episode of Beyond Places. Today we're speaking to the Director General at the Ministry of Infrastructure Rwanda. He is in charge of urbanization, human settlements, and housing development. Welcome to the show, Edward Kyazze.
Thank you, Ms. Kami.
So, I'm hoping I'll be getting a lot of listeners to particularly to this episode from around the world. Can you please give us a general description of Rwanda for our international listeners in terms of, economy, tourism, and urbanization?
Yeah, thank you, Kami. Rwanda, as you may be aware, is a landlocked country located in the Great Rift Valley, where the African Great Lakes and region and East Africa converge. It's one of the smallest and most densely populated countries on the African continent, with a population of over 12.5 million people in the last year, and of course it's increasing at nearly 2.4% per annum. Rwanda's economy has tremendously recovered over the last 2 decades. The country has registered an average GDP growth of around 8% per year, with a double-digit growth recorded in the last 2 quarters of 2019, and that was around 12% growth in the second quarter and 11.9% in the third quarter. Rwanda's gross domestic product, the GDP as we call it, has risen from 752 million in 1994, just after the genocide, to 9.5 billion in 2018. And the GDP per capita has grown from 125 US dollars to 787 US dollars during the same period. And we can say that the sustained economic growth has led to 1 million people being lifted out of poverty between the year 2000 and 2017, while the life expectancy has risen from 29 years in 1994 to 67 years in 2016. You may be aware about Rwanda's performance globally in terms of rankings. When it comes to doing business, Rwanda is the second best place to do business in Africa and 39th easiest place to do business globally, according to the World Bank report of doing business of 2020. And we attribute this thanks to the extensive 10-year doing business reforms, which have resulted in the value of investments registered that tripled from 400 million in 2010 to just over 2 billion in 2018. Of course, we also have recognized that Rwanda is among the 10 global reformers in doing business. Of course, has a B+ long-term foreign currency issuer default rating, we call it IDR, and a stable outlook according to Fitch ratings in 2019. The 4th in Africa and the first least corrupt country in East Africa, according to the Corruption Perception Index of 2015. Well, over the last 2 decades, Rwanda has been positioned itself as one of the most the best touristic conference destinations, and thanks to the iconic Visit Rwanda, which you might be aware, the brand and the vibrant meetings, incentives, and conferences and events, we call it MICE sector. Rwanda's tourism sector has totaled US 1.5 billion investments since the year 2000. Hotel rooms, of course, have increased from a mere 620 in 2003 to over 14,800 in 2018. And the tourism revenues have also jumped from 131 million in 2006 to more than 400 million US dollars in 2018. And of course, the revenues from the meetings, incentives, conferences, and events, tourism, have really grown in numbers from consequential numbers in 2000 to 66 million in 2019. Well, in regards to urbanization, Rwanda's urbanization history is quite recent, but of course qualifies to be one of Africa's most rapidly urbanizing country, growing at 4.4% on average. Of course, the turn of the century, the 21st century, has seen Rwanda's urban population grow almost twice as fast as the rural population. Statistics have shown that 18.4% urban population in 2017 from just less than 10% in 2000. So it must be noted here that Rwanda's rapid urbanization is well correlated with the economic growth. The reason the government has made a deliberate commitment to facilitate and enable urbanization as a driver of social, economic growth and national development. You might be aware also that the government of Rwanda, through its Vision 2050, has an ambitious objective of accelerating urbanization and increasing the average annual growth of the gross domestic product and annual GDP per capita, of course. The vision of embracing urbanization, with that vision, Rwanda recognizes positive relationships between urbanization and economic growth development that has been observed globally, as no country has transited from low-income country status to middle-income country status. So by achieving this vision, of course, Rwanda citizens will enjoy a better livelihood with adequate social protection, improved health, disaster risk reduction, food security, and you mentioned a few. Appropriate, of course, urban infrastructure development will be combined with biodiversity conservation, thus reducing the citizens' vulnerability to the impacts of climate change. Currently, Rwanda is experimenting and implementing the green and smart city approach in its pathway to its sustainable development agenda, sustainable urban development agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. And it really has been so impressive. When I was conceptualizing this podcast, I wanted experts from around the world, and right away I put Rwanda, just because of how much it has improved in such a short time, pretty much in just 2 decades. I wanted for our listeners to get a better understanding of you and your background. So can you please describe your work as an urban planning engineer?
Yeah, thank you, Kami. Well, I call myself an urban planning engineer, given the fact that I did further studies in urban planning, coming from a civil engineering professional background. Of course, having worked at Rwanda Housing Authority, which is a housing and urban development policy implementing agency for Rwanda's Ministry of Infrastructure for 6 years before joining the ministry, of course, to support the policy development and monitoring and evaluation of the related projects in the sector, I feel an all-rounder in terms of urbanization and human settlement sector. Of course, at the Ministry of Infrastructure, where I moved 4 years back, more than 4 years back, our mission is to ensure provision of sustainable infrastructure development that covers definitely transport, energy, water, supply and sanitation, housing and human settlement, aiming to drive Rwanda's economic growth and enhance the quality of life of the citizen. So at the ministry currently, of course, I'm in charge of coordinating all urban development related activities as prescribed in the national urbanization policy. So you can tell that urbanization is a multi-sectoral and cross-sectoral phenomenon that requires a lot of coordination. But through the donors and all stakeholders. But it goes beyond that also to do with the developing appropriate policies that will support the urbanization agenda. That, of course, as I mentioned earlier on, that really the government has really embarked on in terms of seeing it as a future driver of socio-economic growth for the country. So for the moment, that's where I am, and I'm really very passionate for sustainable urbanization and looking at all paths, and more especially in the green city development. Thank you.
And I understand that for many years you were also a lecturer in the Department of Civil Engineering and Environmental Technology at the Kigali Institute of Science and Technology. So you are pretty passionate about it. What I wanted to know as well is how early did you know that you wanted to pursue this career path, becoming an engineer, being part of Rwanda's urban growth? Was it early on when you were studying civil engineering, or even much earlier or much after that?
Thank you very much. It really happened just after, of course, my studies in the civil engineering area, where I realized that, well, maybe civil engineers, of course, are people who really think about constructions and infrastructure, and in their perspective, they tend to have a social component in their design or thinking at a lower context that I felt really needed to be complementing my profession. When they design, they always think of course, about people, but not more than sort of an urban planner who really goes beyond to look at social aspects and environmental aspects. Of course, engineers also think about them, but not at that level and in-depth level that you would expect an urban planner in his perspective. And besides that, of course, it was fascinating. I was fascinated by the striking analysis of the figures that were being produced by international organizations like UN Habitat, which revealed the projected increase in the urban population of the world, and the evidence that there is a lack of capacity among built environment professionals and weak built environment policy in many of the countries which are urbanizing most rapidly, especially in Africa, among the most vulnerable countries. So this drove my passion in terms of really joining to the group of professionals to at least play my role to ensure that urbanization is done in a more sustainable manner and for the benefit of all. Of course, having realized that the future is urban, that really drove me, gave me more passion to join the urban planning profession to support, of course, the urbanization. And the fact that Rwanda was also seeing urbanization as a very key driver in terms of its national development, I felt among the first people to join this group to support the country achieve its own national development targets.
It's really impressive, and I understand that you also like to study, and you studied in Scotland as well.
Scotland very much, and really it's one of those countries that has that sort of a good background in terms of urban planning and all those areas, because these are countries that have really advanced in urban development, and it had a lot. I had a lot to learn from, besides the course itself, but the physical and the practices and that you see globally being picked from the United Kingdom and being applied in various countries in terms of urban development.
Well, Rwanda's lucky that you were part of the brain gain, learning from abroad, but applying what you learned to help even improve further your country. Can you
Thank
please
you.
tell us more about smart cities? So I understand that there's this initiative around Smart Cities Africa, and Rwanda is leading the continent in these initiatives. So in the African context, what are the priorities, opportunities, and challenges considering this?
Yeah, thank you very much, Kami. When it comes to smart city initiatives, as you rightly said, on the African continent, Rwanda is leading on the continent in this perspective. And this emanates from the government of Rwanda's commitment to embrace IT solutions in its bid to address challenges associated with the rapid urbanization and the obvious need to develop a sustainable model to support anticipated growth. Obviously, Rwanda aspires to see its cities develop as competitive, safe, and modern cities to sustain its continued urbanization and economic growth. So having, again, it's also important to note that Rwanda is the chair of the section of the smart cities. Rwanda as part of Smart Africa agenda. So they are the ones leading on the smart cities, and which is more to do with the discussion that we are having here. So having developed the smart sustainable cities blueprint for Smart Africa, Rwanda developed its own smart city framework. We call it the Rwanda Smart Cities Framework. And this framework draws from the country's own context and aspirations to use technology in addressing various public interests with due consideration and domestication of the best practices and lessons from other countries that have successfully embarked on the smart cities development journey. I must say that following the installation of the internet broadband connectivity infrastructure, call it optical fiber, across the whole country, including the remotest area of Rwanda in the year 2017, several smart city initiatives have been implemented and so many others are underway. So in the case of Rwanda, and thanks to the political will and commitment towards that agenda. However, in the African context, despite visible opportunities embedded in driving the smart city agenda, there are still contemporary challenges that need to be addressed, as you rightly said, and which are very fundamental in terms of driving the smart city agenda. The first one I may need to really communicate is to do with the phone penetration, maybe the smartphone penetration. As you might be aware, and you rightly know, that a smart city relies on an inclusive network of smart device users, with the city's inhabitants demanding and creating the services they most value. As such, all citizens' voices should be heard in this effort. And a key pillar of the Smart City Blueprint for Africa was to increase access to smart devices. Because currently, smartphone penetration in Africa is still low. So I see it as a challenge in advancing the smart city agenda, and I believe the highest priority for Africa should be to at least ensure that even the poorest or the low-income earners and the vulnerable groups can be able to access smart devices for use. And I believe we can at least start by distributing, maybe as an option, second-hand smart devices to low-income families and others in need, as Rwanda has already started. I think that's a good practice. At least we started having established a phone producing factory in Rwanda. The government has started distributing new smartphones to those low-income groups. And this is escorted, of course, by the training of those people on how to use them. We've seen such cases in Asia, for example, case of Korea, that's what they started with. They started with the distributing second-hand smart devices to low-income families, and that worked. So the same case could be for Africa if they are to advance the smart city agenda. Then the other issue is to do with the literacy levels. And again, which is also related to the phone penetration, is the ability to use the smartphones by the substantial portion of African population based on the level of literacy. And I believe it will be of no use if a smart tech user cannot afford to interact with the gadget. So I believe as a priority, setting up strategies to massively educate new users on the operation of the smartphones and all those smart device users should be, taken highly as a priority, as also indicated in the Africa's Smart City Blueprint report, which was shared in 2018, I think, during the Africa Smart City Summit. The other issue that really hinders, of course, breaking into the smart city agenda or advancing the smart city agenda is to do with the connected infrastructure. I think I talked about it in terms of the optical cable, the fiber optics running around. Smart cities, of course, are underpinned by an ICT infrastructure and its integration with the services that a city delivers. Given that most African countries still lack broadband connectivity, infrastructure, fiber optic cables, which is very fundamental enabler of the smart city agenda, coupled with, again, the limited access to internet services and unaffordable costs to use those services, of course, the smart city initiative is still a long way to achieve in most of African countries and cities. I believe the priority should be to invest in broadband connectivity infrastructure, supported by establishing policies that can enable access to internet services for all at affordable costs. I will take, of course, my quote from the president during the Smart Africa Summit, where he said, "Investment in ICTs is essential in taking any country to the next level of productivity and efficiency. Investing in ICTs is not at the expense of other sectors. Investing in ICTs results in benefits for every sector, and the earlier you start, the better." So I believe African countries ought to take an immediate step in this regard. And this should be complemented by the deliberate increase of access, definitely, to electricity, either on-grid or off-grid energy, especially solar energy, with the abundant sunlight that we have in Africa, in order to enable even the users to be able to charge their phones or the gadgets for use. So I believe those are the three fundamental challenges that we have in Africa in terms of pushing the smart city agenda. And I think if they are really addressed, I believe we'll be able to achieve the initiative to do with smart city development. Thank you.
So I was researching about some of these smart city related initiatives, and it's pretty impressive even for someone who's not from Africa. For example, Wi-Fi on public transport have tap and go cards, and then there's this goal, and I think a lot of your government services are actually done online already, such as business clearances and I think even land titles, if I'm correct, and access to urban planning data.
Yeah,
So
there are
may I,
several initiatives. Yeah.
Can you name some of these other initiatives just from the top of your head?
Yeah, there are several initiatives. Definitely, you've talked about many of them. Of course, we want the commitment by the government to ensure that it's a paperless economy is high on the agenda. So to do with, for example, getting a construction permit, you are required to submit all those designs in papers and what initially. But right now, it's only done online. And of course, the permit is also, submitted, given to you online. We no longer need to use the papers and those S0 papers, printing the designs, but the perspectives and everything to submit to the city urban planning office. It's no longer. So that's one of the services that has already been taking place, and it's one that has really qualified us in terms of doing business, because you can be able to get your permit within less than 30 days maximum. That is one. We also do things to do with the smart transport. You've talked about it, but I can also tell you about things to do with the security, community security, where we have these cameras in communities. We have these like the smart street lighting initiatives. We already have smart water metering, and we are currently doing actually the smart energy services in terms of you don't need to, you pay what you consume, and you don't need to sort of move to do the payments. We have actually improved very much in terms of doing payments online, and thanks again to the COVID that has already opened up more room for that. But also there are various initiatives all across sectors, especially with the government's commitment to do 100 online services, 100 services online. And we have the Rwanda Online, which is facilitating that. So other than taking people to travel distances to look for a service, it's quite easy to do it online from where you are and get the service again with immediate effect. So this has really improved the efficiency in terms of delivery by the government or public institutions. And private sector has already also taken it over in terms of also ensuring that their services are really provided online.
I think aside from, efficiencies and ease of business, being paperless and, aiming for all these online transactions has a lot to do also with your reputation as having one of the most honest governments in Africa.
Yeah, true. Of course, that's what we are really proud of for the moment. And thanks to the commitment by the government, the political will, to serve the community.
Is it safe, well, for me to assume, and I'd like to ask you as well, of course, that's a good cause and effect when there's higher trust in government because of these efficiencies, because of better transparency and trust in government. Are there more foreign direct investments coming in, as well as aid from international organizations?
Yes, definitely so. And as I really mentioned earlier on, all those investments that we are seeing, and the fact that Rwanda's position for so many years, I think over 5 years, as second place of doing business in Africa, it's not all about doing business in terms of facilitating people get licenses and what, but investors are always looking at safe areas, the safest areas to invest in, be it in Africa or everywhere. So, and safe in terms of their investment, in terms of the transparency, in terms of the accountability, in terms of efficiency, and even the safeguards that they have in place. So we've seen lots of investments in Africa, in Rwanda especially, compared to even our, competing countries where people would love to invest, but are reluctant because of those, unenabling or, conditions, situations. So Rwanda has opened up windows with the neighboring conditions, enabling factors or policies, and we've seen a huge amount of investments going by the global World Bank ranking compared to all African countries. So Rwanda, I should insist that Rwanda is the most, if not the second most safest country on the continent. And that has really opened up windows. And of course, in the trust, as you said, by the public to the government, that has also really moved us in terms of the level of investment, be it local and foreign, but also even participation of donors. They feel safe when it comes to things to do with the, accountability and transparency. They really feel safe collaborating with the government of Rwanda in delivering its urban development, the national development agenda.
The president of Rwanda, Paul Kagame, has been quoted to say that he wants Rwanda to be the Singapore of Africa. Can you tell us more about this, please?
Yeah, thank you very much. Of course, definitely Rwanda's desire to become the Singapore of Africa emanates from the fact that there's a lot we share in common with Singapore. Just to mention a few, perhaps starting even from the size of the country and the minimal resources. Of course, Singapore in itself is small, actually smaller than the size of Kigali, the city of Kigali. But also looking at Rwanda also compared to the whole of Africa and the neighboring countries, you realize that Rwanda is like, the smallest country on the continent in terms of size. The resources, we don't have minerals to say. If they do exist, of course, they are very minimal. And so the whole thing around, just as the case of Singapore, and then the unique history of the two countries, around the humble beginning of a nation, and that is also something that really we share in common. Looking at the history of Singapore and Malaysia, and looking at Rwanda, besides, of course, the genocide, but looking at how the country started from scratch and where it is right now, we see ourselves as somehow really having some common unique features with Singapore, and even the dedicated leadership of the country to serve its citizens to an unprecedented socio-economic prosperity level. You can see really that Singapore's history, looking at the former president and hero, he's usually called LKY, Lee Kuan Yew, who led Singapore's socio-economic transformation from third to first world country status within a single generation, something no other country on earth has ever done. So we believe with the Rwanda's commitment and political will, we can learn a lot from Singapore, and we position ourselves much with Singapore. Of course, there are so many unique things to do with Singapore where they have reached right now, and we believe we can put our steps in that we can position ourselves that way. That's the reason you see Rwanda has a very strong tie with Singapore, purposely to share and support each other in this direction.
In terms of other countries that Rwanda is partnering with, as well as looking at as a model, particularly in terms of smart cities, what are the other countries that Rwanda is learning and exchanging knowledge with?
Thank you very much. We are really learning from various countries, looking at their perspectives. First of all, the main country we are really learning from, including even other collaboration levels at the city level, is one to do with Korea, South Korea, and the city of Seoul. We have this collaboration, and definitely we're actually working with them, looking at even the network management of internet network here, the broadband. You might be aware that Korea Telecom is working in Rwanda, again, on that front. So, and we're sharing a lot from them, especially with the Seoul Metropolitan Smart City project, which is very, very vast in various aspects. The other is to do with France in Paris. Paris, we are really working together. There's a collaboration between the city of Kigali and the mayor of course, of Paris in terms of advancing that smart city agenda. And definitely we have various other partners, not even countries, but also partners like we call them vendors that we are working with in terms of course, addressing various aspects of smart city that we also need to recognize. But there are various countries. Barcelona, we're also working with them, with the city of Kigali and other secondary cities in learning from each other and supporting each other in various aspects. So I believe that is really a good start, and we really all destined to get there.
And all really good places, actually, very advanced, Seoul. Barcelona is one of my favorite cities in the world, and they were really serious about, like, quote unquote, retrofitting the whole city for better livability.
Yeah.
Great. And then, can you please describe to us, in a few sentences, the national urbanization policy of Rwanda? From what I've researched, Kigali has one of the highest urbanization rates in Africa and hosts about half of the country's urban population. So, what is the government's strategy and approach to develop and grow other cities in the country?
Yeah, thank you. Rwanda's national urbanization policy, of course, was established in 2015 following the need to facilitate and enable urbanization as a driver of Rwanda's socioeconomic growth. And you may be aware that Rwanda's overarching national goal in Vision 2020 that we're finishing, we are now moving to Vision 2050, but a midterm one, which is Vision 2035, seeks an exit from the low-income status with emphasis on urbanization as a key driver of economic growth, and specifically, of course, targeting those numbers of urban population. For example, by 2024, 35 urban population and 1.8 million new farm jobs by 2024 to reach middle income status. But by 2050, the whole desire is to ensure that Rwanda is a high income country status. So the policy in itself is to ensure, was established objectively and with a goal to ensure well coordinated urban settlements and development that positively transforms the economy of the country, improves the socio-economic conditions for all, and preserves resources to sustain the life of the future generations. Embedded, of course, in the policy goal was 4 main objectives, which also touch on the pillar that include enhancing institutional capacities to manage urban development in a coordinated manner at all levels of governance, which is more to do with the institutional coordination, given the multi-sectoral or multi and cross-sectoral phenomenon of urbanization. Also, the other objective was to integrate urban planning and management in order to achieve resource efficient and compact growth. Rwanda being a small country with many people and youth in general, we needed to look at how we can create densities and densification as one of the pillars in our policy. The other was to do with the quality of life and equity in our settlements, which is to do with ensuring that all settlements, cities are for all categories of people, and we put it under the pillar called conviviality. Then the other was to do with facilitating employment creation and off-farm productivity for local subsistence and regional competitiveness, which is to do with economic growth, which is much more the ultimate goal of the urbanization. We would like the city, our cities, and urbanization to drive the socio-economic growth of our country. So in a nutshell, the vision is to ensure that urbanization becomes an engine of economic growth and sustainable human settlements, of course, through that. And the policy specifically, as you rightly said, specifies the importance of developing secondary cities to unlock transformative economic opportunities. You might be aware that initially we had the city of Kigali, as you rightly said, has the highest urbanization rates on the continent, but also hosts the country's urban population, half of it. So indeed, the role of secondary cities in really, unlocking the transformative economic opportunities and ensuring regional economic balance was really very much needed. It is true that Kigali really has high urbanization rates, but also this emanates from the fact that Kigali is undoubtedly Rwanda's prime economic powerhouse and hub. The analysis, of course, has shown that its output exceeds that of the secondary cities, plus other 4 towns, maybe potential towns, combined, and is 7 times higher than that of the next largest urban area, meaning that a dynamic Kigali is very central to harnessing agglomeration economies in Rwanda. But despite Kigali's supremacy and the need to manage the pressures and consequences of such rapid urbanization, the government strategically recognized the potential role of other emerging cities and the need to facilitate their growth in a sustainable manner. And this really was realized in, I should say, 10 years back or close to less than 10 years, where the strategy now specified in terms of the midterm national development strategy, where it specified the importance of developing these secondary cities to unlock the transformative economic opportunities and even create regional balance in development. So the secondary cities right now, you might be aware about them, are more of a focus of investments and urbanization. They run across the whole country going by the map. We have those that are really close to the border of Congo, and we know the opportunities in Congo, DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and those in the parts of close to Uganda and Tanzania, as well as those in the central part of Rwanda, which are really helping to unlock and create crossroads trading in Rwanda. So, of course, definitely to realize their potential, of course, the cities would require significant investments in infrastructure as well as skills development with direct linkages to their emerging visions and strategies, of course, to attract and catalyze economic and urban growth. And in response to this, the government, in collaboration with the dedicated support of development partners and stakeholders, has taken a radical approach to ensure that these cities are serviced with the required infrastructure services, social economic amenities, and utilities to stimulate their transformational growth. Of course, this includes servicing of economic zones like industrial zones with regard to infrastructure, engaging private sector in potential investment opportunities in those cities based on their uniqueness, and creating an enabling environment with appropriate incentives to invest in those cities. And of course, this has been complemented by strengthening of the city's governance structures, where we currently have dedicated city management structures for each city to manage the city operations, including investments and, of course, urban growth management. So for the moment, I see secondary cities that really, as a potential with these investments. We've had lots of investments from our development partners that are amounting to over, so far, 400 million, looking at the infrastructure alone before going to investments in commercial development and other areas of development. But I should say that there is a very dedicated, deliberate initiative to ensure that these cities develop as planned by the government as poles of social economic growth. Thank you.
In terms of investments in the economic zones, what kind of industries are they? Are they a good mix of knowledge intensive, or are there some factories and warehouses as well? Or are others like health and education?
Yeah, thank you. Looking at the uniqueness of each city, because one other thing I need to mention is that ever since these cities were declared for national support, they've positioned themselves in terms of branding themselves, looking at their uniqueness in terms of delivery. Those cities, looking at their geographical locations and the unique assets in them, really, they tend to differ. That's why each city has positioned itself according to the unique assets that has potential for them to sort of grow and really catalyze the economic and urban growth that we want. So I should say, for example, like cities that are close to the border with Congo, for example, with Goma, Rubavu has positioned itself as more of a hub, a regional hub for exports. So there are more logistical facilities to enable exports to Congo, but there are also more touristic approaches because, look, financial sector really booming because of the insecurity in Congo. There are lots of financial services that Rubavu provides to Congo in terms of banking their money and also investing in Rubavu city itself. When you go to, again, Rusizi, which is also close to Congo, the city of Bukavu, which is also very populous in terms of numbers, there are also other facilities to do with the, touristic, promoting tourism and promoting cross-border trade and that sort of thing. When it comes to the other cities that are also close or in the middle, on the center of Rwanda, they are also positioning themselves in terms of tourism and agricultural byproducts, and so in these industries, in the industrial zones, the infrastructure provisions that has been coming in or invested in those cities tends to differ depending upon the branding or the positioning of the city towards the catalytic economic and urban growth that we want in those cities. So right now, maybe one case of like the Huye, which has traditionally been and historically been a center of knowledge. Now this city is also positioning itself more in the knowledge-based economy, trying to establish the MAIS, the meetings, incentives, conferences, and research in those cities. And the government has actually supported even these cities by relocating some of the public institutions to those cities, to support their unique assets. For the case of Huye, which hosts the universities and the research centers, pharmaceuticals, and what, these universities and public institutions in charge of education, research, and higher education management or regulation, they have already moved in there. So it's like, it's trying to stimulate and catalyze the initiatives around urban development.
What are the priorities in terms of connecting, even outside of Rwanda? For example, you mentioned that some secondary cities are close to Congo. Are there partnerships in terms of improving, let's say, road or rail connections to the other countries?
Oh yes, very much so. Maybe I should mention that unfortunately Rwanda has not really got a railway line for the moment, but there's a railway line in the pipeline that will connect from Tanzania, Dar es Salaam port, coming of course through all those various cities, crossing to Rwanda, and then that railway line will not stop here, but go to the parts of Congo. And through that railway line, of course, that was initially stationed, planned to stop in Kigali, then another link that will pass through Rubavu city and Musanze, which is very, very touristic in terms of, the famous gorillas, mountain gorillas. That's the positioning of Musanze. But as you cross over it, there is also Rubavu, which is also neighboring with Goma and Congo in general. So that railway line will connect. And we think that's a very good opportunity to also stimulating the whole regional competitiveness. On the other side, of course, definitely these cities also tend to have few things minimal in common, like the city of Musanze, which is more of a touristic city, which is the hub of the mountain gorillas. There's a thinking around pushing it, actually creating a tourism corridor of connecting it with the Rubavu and also connecting it with Rusizi, because Rubavu is surrounded by Lake Kivu, which has a lot of touristic attractions, and Rubavu is also connected with the Rusizi, which is also part of Lake Kivu. So there's a strategy around creating it as a more of a touristic corridor, tourism corridor, where tourists who have visited Musanze for the gorillas, mountain gorillas, and all the nature around it can move again further to Rubavu for the water-based touristic attractions, but also further again by water transport to Rusizi for where we have the natural forest, the biggest natural forest in Nyungwe, and other forests and nature or natural habitats around Congo. So we see it as a very big opportunity around it at creating a tourism sector, corridor. The same case with the other cities. There's some bit of interlinkages to complement each other in various areas.
In you talking about tourism and the lake and the gorillas, I really can't wait to visit Rwanda. When is the best time of the year, like weather-wise, in terms of sightings as well of gorillas?
Well, the best time I should say is actually around the summertime in Europe, and we also having that time around April to August, September. That's a good time, and that's even actually the time we have this naming of the new gorillas, babies that very famous and attracts a lot of people. So I think that's the best time. You can really enjoy it. It's not very. It's a good summertime, and also here and good conditions to climb those mountains and really experience the good weather in Rwanda and the gorillas out there.
So you have such a big task as Director General in the Ministry of Infrastructure, and one of the main sectors you're looking at is housing development. And, it's always challenging for urban planners, especially governments, to address affordable housing. What are your approaches in addressing that in Kigali and the secondary cities and across the country?
Yeah, thank you, Kami. I should say that, like any other country, even including developing world or developing countries, housing has really been a challenging basic human right to be addressed or to deliver to and accessed by all categories of income groups. In Rwanda, it's not, of course, a different case. We've had various studies that have indicated to us that really housing is really high on the priority and should be given priority moving forward. Typical case, like for the case of Kigali, and the secondary cities, according to the International Growth Center study or publication that was done in 2019 on housing needs in Kigali and the secondary city, at least 310,000 new housing units need to be constructed by 2032, which implies an annual demand of over 26,000 units. Yet currently, I believe it's 1,000 units that are delivered every year. For the case of secondary cities and other urban areas, the demand is estimated to be over 80,000 units in the next 10 years, meaning around 8,000 units per year. And that really indicates to you that we already have a lot to do. And all around these issues to do with the fundamentally high cost of financing for both developers and buyers. The interest rates are still high, I should say, as high as between 15 to 17% for developers and 18 to 21% for beneficiaries borrowing in short-term context. The other issue is to do with the high cost of building materials, which is still they're low in quantities and low in variety, both made in Rwanda and those that are imported. And also the low saving capacities of the citizens still is a very big issue, as well as technologies that are applied by local firms in the industry, which seem to be inefficient and non-standardized. So despite all these challenges, of course, there has been a wide approach that has been pursued to make housing affordable, definitely, by addressing, of course, we've been trying to address the cost efficiency in design, construction, and construction management, increasing of locally available material resources, and giving incentives for made in Rwanda construction materials, and use of technologies which allow lower construction costs, and of course trying to support the cost and accessibility to financing by both the supply and demand side, looking at reducing the cost of financing. And definitely, in its commitment to ensure socio-economic transformation for all, the government of Rwanda has set up various strategies and initiatives to facilitate the supply and access to housing through various initiatives that we can currently list as one to do with the government support for infrastructure subsidies to the developers who are interested in investing in affordable housing and high density housing developments, for us to deliver on the densification agenda, land banking, and offering it to developers to reduce the cost, of course, in affordable housing. The incentive to do with the reduction of 50% of corporate income tax for those investors who are investing in affordable housing, but also on the side to support the demand side, we have established the Affordable Housing Financing Fund, of course, to ensure that the low-income earners and the affordable housing demand side can be facilitated. Now, this time around, the fund really gives 11% interest rate on the mortgages, of course, which, if compared to the commercial banks, which is 18 to 22%, at least could be a very good opportunity to enable and facilitate the demand side. So these initiatives, of course, have also seen, we are seeing a lot of tremendous increase in investment in affordable housing across various cities. In Kigali alone, I think approximately 37,000 units are in the pipeline, even though we still think it is still a long way to go in terms of the required number. But we believe the future would be better with these initiatives and the government's commitment towards delivering to those initiatives to ensure that affordable housing is accessible and available in our cities. Of course, this is also complemented by the fact that those socially vulnerable groups, the government has always committed and has supported them in terms of accessing social housing through various schemes, and we've seen lots of them coming in. So, but we believe the role of the private sector is still fundamental in delivering to this agenda, complemented by the government support.
You know, Edward, it has been really inspiring to hear you share about the plans, policies in place, and all your infrastructure projects. It's such a a big task to be Director General, I'm sure, to be at the Ministry of Infrastructure of, really a country to look out for. You're doing so many great things. So thank you for your time and thank you for sharing all your insights. Thank you. It's nice to meet you, and I hope we could collaborate somehow in the future.
Yes, definitely, definitely.
Thank you very much for listening to this episode of Beyond Places. I would love to hear from you. Feel free to connect with me on social media and carmipalafox@gmail.com. If you enjoy this podcast, please do subscribe. I would really appreciate it. Bye and see you again next week.